Welcome to another deep dive. We're looking at Rklb, specifically their 2024 Form 10K annual report. It's a really fascinating look at this company that's trying to make waves in the very exciting world of space exploration.
Yeah, I think
Hmm.
one of the most interesting things about Rocket Lab is that they're not just focusing on
Yeah,
launching satellites.
right. So not just like a ride-share service to orbit.
Exactly. They're trying to create a whole ecosystem in space.
Okay, so what does that mean when you say ecosystem?
So think of it this way. They design and build launch vehicles, the actual rockets. But they also create the components that go into those spacecraft. They manage missions. They work with space data applications. So they're really trying to be involved at nearly every single level.
Wow, that's
What's that?
way more than I initially realized. And they have something kind of unique, don't they? Like a private orbital launch range?
Yeah, you don't see that very often at all.
Yeah.
And that gives them a ton of control over their schedule, mission
Mhm.
priorities. And, in an industry that is as competitive as space is, that flexibility is a huge advantage.
Right. It's like having your own private on-ramp to the space highway. So, okay. They're launching things into orbit. What about the rockets themselves? Their flagship product is the Electron,
The
right?
Electron, yeah. Designed for smaller payloads, but it's already had a ton of success. Over 200 spacecraft deployed across 54 missions. And you want to hear something crazy?
Yeah, lay it on me.
In 2024, Electron was the second most frequently launched orbital rocket, not just in the U.S., but globally.
Okay, that's
That's
impressive. That's not just, launching a few satellites. That's serious consistency. What's driving that? Is that just market demand, or is there something special about the Electron itself?
It's a combination of things for sure. There is definitely a growing demand for launching these smaller payloads. But Rocket Lab has also been really smart about positioning themselves
Yeah.
in that niche.
Yeah.
And the Electron leverages some interesting technologies. They've got 3D printed electric turbopump engines.
3D printing rocket engines. That sounds like sci-fi becoming reality. Does that? I mean, what does that do for their performance and cost compared to using like a traditional engine?
It does a couple things.
Yeah.
One, 3D printing allows
Okay.
you to make very complex designs that
Ah.
would be difficult or impossible with traditional manufacturing, so that
Mhm.
can lead to improved performance. It also has the potential to really significantly reduce
Yeah.
manufacturing costs,
Yeah.
which, of course, in a competitive industry like this is very, very important.
Mhm.
And then in addition to that, they also use a carbon composite for a stage.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
really pushing the boundaries there with the Electron. But you know what I'm really curious about is SAC is
Yeah.
the next big thing. They're not content with just small payloads. They're moving on up to the
Yeah,
neutron rocket.
the neutron. Yeah, this is their move into
Yeah.
the medium lift market, and it's designed for reusability. Just like
Yeah.
SpaceX's Falcon 9.
Okay, so we're talking about rockets landing back on Earth after they deliver their payload. How do they do that? Like, what were the key design decisions for the Neutron to achieve reusability?
So the Neutron,
Yep.
it's going to be a two-stage rocket, 43 meters tall.
Mhm.
The reusable first stage will be capable of landing on an ocean platform.
Like a drone ship.
You got it.
Yeah, yeah.
And this offers a lot of flexibility
Yeah,
in terms of, where they can land,
yeah.
which could be a big strategic advantage.
It's amazing how landing rockets has become almost routine now. Where are they going to launch this?
The Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport in Virginia.
Okay, cool. And
Yeah.
you know Rocket Lab is. They're very focused, obviously, on their launch vehicles, but there's another side to their business that's also pretty impressive, and that's their space systems.
Right. They're not just getting things to space. They're thinking about what goes on those rockets
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, so what kinds of services and components are they offering on the space system side?
They offer really a full suite of services. Anything from designing and manufacturing spacecraft components,
Yeah.
all the way to full spacecraft as a service
So,
solution.
so if I need I don't know,
Yeah.
a reaction wheel for my satellite or a really awesome solar panel, Rocket Lab is the place to go.
You got it. They specialize in making
Yeah.
crucial components like
Yeah.
reaction wheels,
Yeah.
star trackers, high voltage batteries. They've become real experts in
Yeah.
solar power solutions in particular. And a lot of this has come through some strategic acquisitions that they've made.
So they're buying up companies that have expertise
Yep.
in these key areas.
Exactly. It's a smart way to
Yeah.
really rapidly expand your capabilities in a field that's growing as fast as space is.
Now it sounds like they've positioned themselves pretty well. But I imagine operating in space comes with a whole bunch of
Regulations,
challenges.
risks. Yeah. The 10K actually gives you a really surprisingly transparent look at all the regulatory complexities they have to navigate Yeah. They've got to comply with U.S. securities laws, export and import
Yeah.
controls, economic sanctions, regulations from agencies like the FAA, the New Zealand Space Agency. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Wow. That's like a regulatory labyrinth. They launch from both the U.S. and New Zealand. How do they manage that from a legal perspective?
Well, they have a really unique advantage there. There's actually a treaty between the U.S. and New Zealand that allows them to launch U.S. technology from their New Zealand launch site.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like a diplomatic fast track for their rocket.
Exactly.
That's a huge edge in such a global industry. But even with that, the space industry is inherently risky. What does the 10K tell us about the challenges that Rocket Lab is facing as they try to grow?
Well, they're kidding. Very candid about the risks, which I appreciate. And
One of the
biggest areas of risk is really financial and operational. So you're talking about managing their rapid growth, achieving profitability, and dealing with
the ups and downs
of government funding, which could be very unpredictable.
Governments can be fickle partners sometimes.
Yeah. 1 minute they're pouring money into space, the next minute they're cutting budgets.
Right. So how do we plan around that?
Well, they acknowledge the risk straight up in the 10K. They point out that their business is vulnerable to disruptions in U.S. government operations and funding.
So it's a reality they have to just accept.
Yeah.
It's like trying to build a business on shifting sand.
Right. But it's not just government funding they have to worry about, is it? I mean, the competition in the space industry just get more intense.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got SPETA, the established giants like SpaceX. And then you've got SEPA, this whole wave of new startups all trying to grab a piece of the pie. And that competition could force them to lower prices to stay competitive, which can really impact their profitability.
That's a tightrope walk, isn't it? Staying innovative, maintaining quality, but also keeping costs under control in what is ultimately a very price-sensitive market. And then even if they manage all of that, there are just the inherent risks of actually operating in space.
Right. You're talking about potential launch delays. You have the possibility of technical failures, even the risk of collisions with space debris. These are all challenges that every space company faces, and Rocket Lab acknowledges that, even with Willis and Cox. The most rigorous testing and precautions, you can't completely eliminate those uncertainties.
It's a reminder that space is, ultimately, an unforgiving environment. And then there's a whole new category of risk that's emerged, really, in recent years, and that's geopolitical instability.
The 10K specifically cites the ongoing war in Ukraine as a potential factor that could affect their operations.
It's crazy to think that, conflict on one side of the world could have these ripple effects on a space company thousands of miles away. How do you even begin to account for something like that?
I think it just highlights how interconnected our world is and how vulnerable global supply chains are. These seemingly distant events can have unforeseen consequences.
It makes you realize that, a space company isn't just dealing with rockets and satellites. They're operating within this complex web of global politics and economics. It sounds like they're facing some pretty serious headwinds.
Yeah, they are. But what I find interesting is how the 10K also reveals their approach to these challenges. They're not just acknowledging the risks, they're actively working to mitigate them. And getting part of that is their focus on their people and the company culture.
So they're building rockets, but they're also building a team.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me more about that. What kind of culture are they fostering at Rocket Lab? So the 10K repeatedly emphasizes the importance of their workforce, in fact. They grew their employee count by over 25% in 2024, and now they have over 2,100 employees.
Wow, that's a lot of brain power dedicated to space. But it's not just about hiring a bunch of engineers.
Right. You've got to have the right kind of culture in place. And they're very intentional about cultivating a culture that values innovation, a hard work ethic, but above all, collaboration. And they even highlight this event they call the Rocket Challenge.
Rocket Challenge. What's that all about?
It's an internal competition where teams design and launch small rockets.
So it's like a high-tech egg drop challenge.
Yeah, exactly. It's about encouraging hands-on problem solving, teamwork, but obviously space is serious business. Safety has to be a top priority.
Right, and the 10K does.
Yeah.
Make that very clear.
Right.
They emphasize they're comprehensive health and safety policies, and they really empower their employees to identify and address any potential hazards. They recognize that, working in the space industry as inherent risks. and they're committed to mitigating those.
So it sounds like they're trying to build a culture where everyone feels responsible for safety,
Yeah.
not just a select few, which is great. But at the end of the day, all of this emphasis on culture and people, it wouldn't matter much if they weren't performing financially. What's the 10K tell us about their financial health?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, let's dive into that. So what's the story? Is Rocket Lab actually making money?
Well, the 2024 10K gives us a pretty detailed picture. And overall, they're showing impressive growth, even with all the challenges that we've been talking about.
Okay, give me the highlights here. How much revenue did they pull in last year?
Buckle up, because this is a big one. $436.2 million in revenue for 2024.
Whoa, that's a massive jump. What was their
Yeah.
growth rate compared to the previous year?
A whopping 78% increase from 2023.
Wow, I mean, it sounds like their strategy of diversifying beyond just launch services is really paying off.
It seems to be.
Okay, but break it down for me. Where is all this revenue coming from? Is it mostly from launching satellites? Or is their space systems business really taking off?
Both segments are contributing to this growth. Space systems revenue saw an incredible 80% surge, reaching $310.8 million.
So that's almost 3/4 of their total revenue.
Yeah, it seems like. Their bet on expanding into space systems is really paying dividends.
So that's great. What about launch services, though? Are those keeping pace?
Oh, yeah. They're doing well, too. Launch services revenue increased by 74% to reach $125.4 million.
Okay, so it sounds like they're kind of hitting on all cylinders, but revenue is only one piece of the puzzle, right? The real question is, are they actually turning a profit?
That's the ultimate question. And while they're not quite profitable yet, the 10K does show a significant improvement in their gross profit margin. So they're definitely moving in the right direction.
That's encouraging, especially while they're still investing so heavily in new technology and expanding so rapidly. But even with this strong performance, we can't ignore those risks and challenges that we talked about earlier. So let's dig into those a little bit deeper.
You're right. It's important to keep those in mind. And I do appreciate that. The 10K doesn't sugarcoat anything. They're very transparent about the hurdles that they face.
That honesty is refreshing, especially in an industry that's often full of, hype. One of the risks that really jumps out at me is their reliance on government contracts for such a significant portion of their revenue. That's a bit of a double-edged sword.
It is. Government funding can be very inconsistent. It's subject to changing political priorities, budget cuts, and the 10K explicitly mentions the potential for disruptions in U.S. government operations and funding as a major risk.
They're at the mercy of decisions that they can't control. What can they do to kind of manage that risk?
Well, diversification is key. Right now, they are heavily reliant on these government contracts. But if they can expand their commercial customer base, that would provide a buffer against those fluctuations in government funding.
Spread the risk.
Exactly.
Makes sense. But even if they manage to navigate that, government funding roller coaster, there's still this big elephant in the room, which is competition. I mean, the space industry is getting more crowded by the day. How are they going to hold their own against, established players like SpaceX and all these new startups popping up left and right?
It's a great question, and they address it head on in the 10K.
Yeah.
They highlight the risk of price wars
Yeah.
and the need to constantly innovate, to stay ahead of the curve.
Right. It's that classic innovator's dilemma. You have to keep pushing the boundary, developing new technology, while also keeping costs under control, which is no easy feat.
It's a very delicate balance. And their bet is that, by focusing on vertical integration, controlling so much of their supply chain, from components all the way to launch services, that'll give them a competitive edge.
So if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. But even with Matar, the best technology, the most efficient manufacturing, there's always the risk that something could go wrong. I mean, you're dealing with the complexities of spaceflight.
Right, and 10K acknowledges that. They point out that, developing new products, like the Neutron rocket, carries inherent risks. There's no guarantee that these projects will be successful, technologically or commercially.
It's a gamble, but hopefully a calculated one. But then there's another risk that's, even harder to predict or control. And that's supply chain disruptions. We've all seen how fragile global supply chains can be in recent years.
And the 10K highlights that. They talk about their reliance on specific vendors, sometimes even single suppliers for certain key components. And anything disrupts those supply chains. It can have a ripple effect across their entire operation.
Yeah, it's like, house of cards, one gust of wind, and the whole thing can come tumbling down. How are they addressing that
No,
vulnerability?
they're aggressed, definitely aware of the risk,
Yeah.
and they're working to diversify their supplier base wherever possible. They're also exploring options for building more redundancy into the supply chain so that they're not entirely dependent on a single source for these critical components.
Smart move. It sounds like they're really taking a proactive approach to
Yeah.
risk management.
But there's one final risk I want to touch on, and this one's a little bit harder to quantify.
Yeah.
Geopolitical instability.
The the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a
Right.
stark reminder that even a space company operating thousands of miles away can be affected by events that are unfolding on the other side of the world. So how? How are they factoring that into their planning?
It's a really tough one to plan for, and it just highlights how interconnected everything is, how these seemingly distant events can have ripple effects on industries across the globe.
Including space.
It's a wake-up call, I think, for any company that's operating in this, increasingly globalized world. You can't just focus on your own little backyard anymore. You have to be aware of, the geopolitical landscape and how it might shift.
It's a whole new era of risk management.
Right. So we've got government funding uncertainties, intense competition, technological challenges, supply chain vulnerabilities, geopolitical wildcards, it sounds like. Rocket Lab is operating in a minefield out there.
It's not for the faint of heart,
Yeah.
that's for sure. But their 10K really reveals a company that's not just aware of these risks, they're actually developing strategies to mitigate them. And a big part of that is their focus on innovation, operational excellence, and most importantly, their people.
It's almost like they're building a company culture that's as resilient as their rocket.
Yeah.
It's inspiring. I mean, they're not. They're acknowledging the challenges, but they're not being paralyzed by them.
Exactly. It speaks to their ambition and their belief in their ability to overcome these hurdles and achieve their goals.
It's a reminder that success in any industry, but especially one as complex as space, it requires more than just technical brilliance. It takes a certain mindset, a willingness to adapt, an unwavering belief in
your mission. It's about having the vision to see the possibilities.
Yeah.
And the tenacity to make them a reality.
Well, speaking of possibilities, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what this all means for the bigger picture of the space industry. What does Rocket Lab's journey tell us about the future of space exploration as a whole?
That is a fantastic question, and one that I think we should definitely dive into.
Okay. So what does Rocket Lab's story tell us about the future of space exploration? Stick with us. Okay, so what does Rocket Lab's story tell us about the future of space exploration?
I think Rocket Lab's a great example of what we're seeing across the entire space industry. This incredible innovation, fierce competition, and this real push to make space more accessible, not just for governments, but for businesses, for everyday people.
Yeah, it's like a new space race. But this time, it's not just nations competing, it's companies.
Yeah.
Big and small, entrepreneurs, everyday people with big dreams.
Yeah, it's a democratization of space happening right in front of us. And, the barriers to entry are getting lower thanks to technology, private investment. And Rocket Lab is a perfect example of that. But their 10K also shows us the challenges that come along with this. New era of space exploration.
Right. It's not all sunshine and rocket launches. So what are some of the key takeaways from Rocket Lab's experience that other companies, maybe even outside of the space industry, can learn from?
I think one of the biggest ones is the power of vertical integration. Rocket Lab's control over their supply chain, from making components to launching them into space. That gives them a huge amount of flexibility and resilience, which is so important in an industry that is as dynamic and unpredictable as space is.
Right. They've built their own little space ecosystems that are not as reliant on
external factors
that they can't control.
Which is super important when delays and disruptions can be so costly. Absolutely. And that's a lesson, I think, for any business that wants to be less reliant on third-party vendors and have more control over their own destiny. Another key takeaway is just the importance of a culture of innovation. Rocket Lab is not afraid to push boundaries, experiment with new technologies, whether it's 3D printing rocket engines or reusable launch vehicles.
And that boldness
Yeah.
is contagious. It sets the tone for the whole company, where everyone feels empowered to think creatively, to challenge assumptions. It's not about being reckless. It's about taking calculated risks and learning from your mistakes.
That's all about fostering a mindset of experimentation and continuous improvement. And that's essential for any company that wants to thrive in a world that's changing as rapidly as ours is.
But innovation alone isn't enough, is it? You also need to be able to execute effectively and efficiently.
You got it. And that's where operational excellence comes in. Rocket Lab's focus on streamlining their processes, maintaining quality, managing risk. That's just as important as their technological advancements. It's about having the discipline and the systems in place to actually turn those innovative ideas into results.
Ideas are cheap. Execution is everything.
And finally, I think one of the most important lessons from Rocket Lab's 10K is the importance of the human element. They really get that. Their people are their most valuable asset.
We talked about this earlier, this commitment to building a strong company culture. And it's not just talk. It's evident in the things that they're doing, like the Rocket Challenge. Their focus on
Employee safety.
Yeah, they're investing in their employees, fostering a collaborative environment, creating opportunities for growth. And it's clearly a big part of their success. It's easy to forget sometimes, especially in, a high-tech industry like space. But the human element is still the driving force behind all of this innovation and progress. So, taking all of that into account, what does this all mean for the future of the space industry?
I think it points to a future where space is increasingly commercialized. We're going to see a lot more. Private companies like Rocket Lab taking on a bigger role in everything from launching satellites to exploring the solar system.
So space is no longer just the exclusive domain of governments and giant corporations. It's a future where entrepreneurs, startups, even individuals can make a real impact. And Rocket Lab is part of that.
They are. And that's what makes it so exciting. We're at the very beginning of this new era of space exploration driven by innovation, competition, and a shared desire to push the limits of what's possible.
But as we've seen from Rocket Lab's 10K, this future is not without its challenges. There are risks, hurdles, a lot of hard work ahead.
There is. But for those who have the vision, the determination, the right team, the rewards are astronomical.
Well said. The space industry is not for the faint of heart. It takes a certain kind of boldness, a willingness to embrace uncertainty, and a relentless pursuit of excellence.
It's a field where the stakes are high, the challenges are constant, and the possibilities are limitless.
And that's what makes it so captivating. The space industry represents the ultimate frontier, a human ingenuity and exploration.
I couldn't agree more. It's amazing to be able to witness this unfolding chapter of human history.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Rocket Lab's world, we want to leave you with one final thought. Considering how quickly space technology is advancing, how much more accessible space is becoming, what future innovations or applications do you think we might see in the next decade?
Wow. It's a great question. Will space tourism become commonplace? Will we see asteroid mining take off? Will we finally establish a permanent human presence on Mars? I mean, the possibilities really are endless.
And that's the beauty of it. The future of space exploration is still being written, and we're all invited to be a part of it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Rocket Lab and the future of space. We hope you learned something, and maybe you're even feeling a little bit inspired to dream a little bigger. Until next time, keep looking up.
So we've seen Rocket Lab's impressive growth and all the innovation and their very transparent approach to the risks involved. But zooming out a bit, what does this all tell us about the bigger picture, about the future of the space industry itself?
Rocket Lab's story is a really interesting example, I think, of what's happening in space right now. It's a time of incredible innovation, obviously. We're seeing fierce competition, but also this real push to make space accessible to everyone, not just for governments, but businesses. You and me.
Yeah, it's a new space race. It's not just nations anymore. It's companies big and small, entrepreneurs, regular folks with big ideas.
Exactly. It's like we just think democratization of space happening right now. And the barriers to entry are getting lower and lower, thanks to technology, private investment. And Rocket Lab is a perfect example of that. But their 10K also shows us that there are real challenges that come with this new era of space exploration.
Right. It's not all easy launches and smooth sailing.
So what are some of the key takeaways here from Rocket Lab's experience that other companies even outside the space industry can learn from?
Well, one of the big ones is the importance of vertical integration. Rocket Lab's control over their supply chain, from manufacturing to launch services. That gives them flexibility and resilience. That's so valuable in such a crazy industry.
Right. They've built their own little world, their space ecosystems. They're not as reliant on all those external factors.
Exactly. And that's a good lesson, I think, for any business that wants to have more control over its own fate. Another takeaway, I think, is just the importance of a culture of innovation. Rocket Lab is not afraid to try new things, push the boundaries. 3D printed engines, reusable rockets, that kind of boldness can really make a difference. It sets a tone for the whole company.
It does. It creates an environment where everyone feels empowered to think outside the box, to challenge assumptions. It's not about being reckless. It's about calculated risks.
And learning from mistakes.
Right. You got to be willing to fail sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
but innovation alone isn't enough either. Right? You need to be able to execute efficiently.
You got to walk the walk.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's where operational excellence comes in.
Mm.
Rocket Labs focus on streamlining their processes, making sure everything is high quality, managing risk. That's just as important as the tech itself.
It's about having the discipline and the systems in place to turn those big ideas into tangible results.
And then, I think the final big takeaway from Rocket Labs 10K is their emphasis on the human element. They really get it, that people are their most valuable asset.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier, their commitment to company culture. And it's not just lip service, they're backing it up with action.
They are. They're putting their money where their mouth is, investing in their people, building a collaborative environment. It's a big part of their success.
So taking all of this into account, what does it tell us about the future of the space industry?
I think we're going to see space become more and more commercialized. More private companies like Rocket Lab playing a leading role in everything, from launches to deep space exploration.
So space is no longer just for governments and these giant corporations. It's a future where anyone with a good idea can make a real impact.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. This is just the beginning of a whole new era for space exploration.
But Rocket Lab's 10K also shows us that this future isn't going to be without challenges.
Right. There will be risks. There will be hurdles to overcome.
It's not going to be easy.
It's not going to be easy. But for those with the vision and the determination and the right team, the rewards are huge.
It's a reminder that the space industry is not for faint of heart. It takes a certain boldness, a willingness to embrace uncertainty, and a relentless pursuit of excellence.
The stakes are high. The challenges are constant. But the possibilities are endless.
That's what makes it so captivating, this ultimate frontier of human ingenuity and exploration.
It's a privilege to be able to see it all unfolding.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today into Rocket Lab and the future of space, we want to leave you with a final thought, given how quickly everything in space is advancing, how accessible space is becoming. What do you think we're going to see in the next decade?
Well, will space tourism finally become the norm? Will we see asteroid mining take off? Will we finally have a permanent human presence on Mars? Who knows?
Yeah.
But the possibilities really are as vast as space itself.
And that's the beauty of it. The future is still being written, and we're all invited to be a part of it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something, and maybe you're even feeling a little bit inspired to dream a little bigger. Until next time, keep looking up.